Canada's Liberal Party secured a fourth consecutive term after a narrow win in an election that was seen as one of the most consequential in its recent history.
Liberal Party candidate and interim Prime Minister Mark Carney flipped his party's fortunes with a campaign focused on combating President Trump's tariffs and threats of annexation. Nick Schifrin has the story.
In Ottawa today, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney returned to his office victorious after celebrating a victory that he scripted with an unlikely co-writer.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
We will fight Trump's counter tariffs. In fact,
Carney's combative tone throughout the campaign against President Trump's taunts.
So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
Led Carney and the Liberal Party to a remarkable reversal of fortune. In January, when former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepped down,
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
Trudeau and the Liberal Party appeared set to lose by double digits. But Trump maintained his pressure, disparaging Trudeau, vowing imperial expansion, and portraying Canada not as a neighbor, but an economic drag.
They should be a state. I mean that. I really mean that. Because we can't be expected to carry a country.
Anti-Trump sentiment in Canada surged and became a newfound nationalism. That helped Carney, who's led both the Canadian and the British central banks, portray himself as the best candidate to take on Trump.
It is a scary time with what's happening across the border in the United States, and I feel that Mark Carney is a serious choice for a leader who will address that really with the right level of gravitas.
In contrast, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's policies and rhetoric were characterized as Trump-like, and he lost even his own local election.
When the people are coming here, they are putting one foot in Canada and one foot in the United States.
These Trump-propelled politics perhaps personified in the Haskell Free Library, where for 120 years Americans and Canadians have been able to read across a border marked only by a line of tape.
The library always been a symbol of unity, a symbol of unification, a symbol of friendship, a symbol of our two countries, our two communities.
Sylvie Bouldereau is the president of the library's board of trustees. The Trump administration will soon block Canadians from entering the U.S. side without going through border control. And in this election, Bouldereau says Canadians rallied against U.S. pressure.
The election was about who's gonna be the best person to deal with Donald Trump. It shouldn't have been that. It should have been just about us Canadian. This is what it is.
The Liberals failed to secure a majority and will likely have to form a coalition government. So Carney faces a challenging road ahead, one that he says will be paved without American partnership.
Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade anchored by the United States is over. These are tragedies, but it's also our new reality. We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
Tonight, President Trump and Prime Minister Carney spoke on the phone, and Carney's office said the leaders agreed on Canada and the U.S. working together, quote, as independent sovereign nations. To decode what all this means for Canada and U.S.-Canada relations, we turned to Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute, an independent research not-for-profit. She joins me from Vancouver. Shachi Kurl, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. As we noted, Mark Carney took over as Prime Minister just 2 months ago at a moment when the Liberal Party was way down in the polls. How do you think he was able to execute this reversal of fortune?
Well, thanks very much for having me this evening. There were really three factors. Some of them you've already covered in the report that you put together. One of those things was, of course, the Trump factor. Trump was, in many ways, the main character in the narrative of the Canadian election, overshadowing both Carney and his main conservative opponent, Pierre Poilievre. So if Canadians were planning to look at their ballot question and really what was driving their vote through the lens of, do the governing Liberals deserve a rare fourth term after almost 10 years in power? That was pushed entirely to the side by questions of sovereignty. And it's important to remember, I think, for a US audience, that unlike many countries around the world, since Canada was granted its dominion in 1867, no one has ever threatened Canada's borders or sovereignty, either rhetorically or otherwise. So this was something that really rattled Canadians. It rattled their psyche, and it had a profound effect. Of course, the departure of Justin Trudeau, deeply unpopular, also released a massive pressure valve for disaffected Liberals. It enabled them to come back to the party. And then, of course, Carney ran a good rhetorical campaign that was not matched by Mr. Poilievre. He, in the initial weeks of all of the Trump tariff annexation drama, continued to try to run a campaign that was based on cost of living, consumer carbon pricing, lots of other domestic issues at a time when Canadians were emotionally not there, and he's paid the price for it. I should point out, however, he managed to grow the size of his caucus in last night's vote and grow his share of percentage of popular vote. I think he'll probably hang on to his job, but of course it's Carney who just eludes getting a parliamentary majority by a handful of seats.
We played some of the sound from Carney's speech last night, in which he talked about how the system of open global trade anchored by the U.S. is, quote, over. He seems to be trying to position himself as a kind of ideological leader of the free world. He's talked about building a coalition of like-minded countries who share our values. Can Canada really do that?
It's a very tall order, but it is something that has been on the minds of Canadians, again, going back to the renegotiation of NAFTA back in 2018, again, under a Trump administration. So, NAFTA had been going merrily along since basically 1993. And it created a situation wherein Canada needed to start thinking about its economic situation in the world, its security situation in the world, and so there is an expectation and a desire on part of Canadians to see their government be able to build bridges and build coalitions, economic or security or otherwise, with other countries. But it's going to be tough to do at a time where Canada is struggling to forge really, really deep relationships, for example, with countries such as India, where it's a very frosty Canada-India relationship, or with China, where that relationship is almost non-existent. Definitely, it's part of why you've seen Mark Carney make overtures to France, to Europe, to the United Kingdom, to try and not only reestablish that relationship, but shore it up and strengthen it.
And some of those challenges that Carney faces internationally are not only, of course, China and India and those frosty relationships, but also the relationship with Donald Trump. The two did have a phone call just a few minutes ago, so we'll see where that goes. But Carney still faces Trump himself, the tariffs, criticisms of low defense spending. And so how short do you believe this honeymoon will be when it comes to Canada and the U.S.?
Well, I think it's going to be a very short honeymoon for Mr. Carney, simply because of the size and the daunting nature of the task in front of him, insofar as trying to make the case for the removal of these tariffs, or at least not seeing greater tariffs placed on Canada, which is already having an impact on jobs in this country, on the manufacturing sector, and of course, driving all kinds of economic anxiety and uncertainty among Canadian employers. And of course, employers, businesses don't like uncertainty. So they're already thinking about, well, how do we move our business interests out of Canada? None of that is good news for Canada. However, we've also seen the president, say one thing one day, say something very different the next day, lean all in on very punitive tariffs at very high amounts, and then take them back. And so what Carney cannot control for is that he can't control for the chaotic nature of decision making out of the White House. What he can control is what he tries to do at the state level and with big cities, and trying to repair that relationship with the U.S.
Shachi Kurl, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.